Democratic voters now turning to Republicans? Why are even some young voters who used to be really sympathetic to the Democratic Party moving towards Trump? And that's a lot to unpack. And until you look at it clinically and clear-eyed, you're not going to come to the conclusions of how do you fix what you have.
Well, any thoughts, Jim, from what you've heard? I mean, you are right. It is. The good news is this isn't an FDR 55-45 nation or a Reagan, 49-state sweep. It is, at the end of the day, you take the 3 blue wall states that would have elected Harris. You have Democrats winning 2 of the 3 Senate seats there. You have Kamala Harris within a point in Wisconsin, a couple of points in Michigan, a couple of points in Pennsylvania. Again, not a landslide there, but my gosh, she did worse in 48. Democrats did worse in 48 of the 50 states. They got routed by 13 points or so in Florida, 13, 14 points or so in Texas. When in Texas, they were getting closer and closer over the past 15 years to actually making that race competitive. Nothing there. So what are you hearing from Democrats mainly? That is there any sort of consensus in these early days?
I don't think there's any consensus, and there rarely is. As close to an election, I think you would kind of hit on it at the top of your statement right there, that the redemption probably exists in trying to figure out why are they doing well with governors in states like Michigan and in Pennsylvania, and why are some of these Senate candidates able to win in states where Vice President Harris could not win. Start to figure out what's different about their politics than the politics you see in Washington. They know, like, listen, it is like we're now 20 years into this trend where whatever we give people, they want something different. There's always this sort of anti-ruling class backlash. So presumably in the off-year elections or in the next presidential election, they should do better. But and we've been talking about this a lot on this show for the last year, the thing that there's been a siren ringing, like, why were Hispanics moving even long before this towards Republicans? Why are working class voters used to be the bedrock of the Democratic Party, the Bernie Sanders crowd? Why are they suddenly attracted to Trump? And it's very hard to win national elections just having really rich, educated people in big cities loving you. You need more. You've got to have a more diverse coalition. You've got to be able to appeal to working class voters who are worried about inflation and economic topics. And so someone will emerge at some point to be able to lead them out of the promised land, but there's not an obvious figure. I don't think Michelle and Barack Obama want to lead a revival of the party. Right. And Barack Obama can't run again anyways. It's going to be very hard for Vice President Harris to say, hey, I lost and did worse than Joe Biden in 48 states, but I'm the person to lead you. And so they're going to have to find who are those figures to lead them. It's Hakeem Jeffries, probably going to be the most powerful Democrat by virtue of his position. Is he the future of the party? I don't know. Probably one of those governors you mentioned.
So Jim was talking about the back and forth nature of American politics, and we've been doing this a little while. I've done this before. I want to do it again, just for people that are thinking, they always seem to think that the election that was most recently held is the end of history, and we've seen it time and time again. I just want to go over this again. In 2004, Republicans won. Karl Rove declared a permanent majority. 2 years later, Nancy Pelosi was elected the first woman Speaker of the House. Democrats took charge. 2008, Barack Obama is elected in the Hope and Change election, and Democrats talk about a permanent sweeping majority of the ascendant. 2 years later, the Tea Party comes in, and they are in charge. Could not be more different than Barack Obama and all those people who won in 2008. So that was in 2010. 2012, Barack Obama gets reelected. 2014, Republicans take charge of the Senate. 2016, Trump's elected. 2017, Republicans lose. 2018, Republicans lose. 2019, Republicans lose. 2020, Joe Biden elected president. 22, Democrats hold off the red wave. 24, the red wave comes. So there is a back and forth and this whole idea that this is somehow the end of history, which we heard in 2004 when Bush got reelected. We heard in 2008 when Barack Obama got elected. It's just not. But, Anna, the Democrats have serious problems. There's just not going to come back by gravity. They have serious problems. They lost a great number of Latino voters. They lost a great number of black men. They lost young voters in numbers that they're just is shocking to them that voted for them 2 years ago, 4 years ago. Asian Americans broke away from them. 48 of 50 states broke against Democrats. And some of those states, like I said, Texas, Florida, Pennsylvania is moving that way with party registration. If Democrats don't do something fast, Pennsylvania is going to be gone 4 years from now. And the ability to win an election seems even more narrow. What do you think happened a couple of days ago? And where do Democrats need to go over the next 4 years if they want to run a competitive race against the next Republican nominee?
Yeah, it's a difficult week. You know, I think elections are an ancient technology for finding out who your neighbors are, what they're thinking, what they're feeling, right? We have these other polls and other things, but not until you get 100 million plus people driving somewhere, voting, mailing in things, do you actually know who lives around you? And this is not what we've had in recent years, which is a popular vote loss with an electoral college victory the last time Trump won. This is a clear statement of where most people, at least most people who vote, are. And I think it's obviously going to be a moment of reckoning. I don't think we have all the pieces of what needs to change, but I'll say a couple things. I think perhaps the biggest irony of this particular result is that Democrats have worked very hard to build a platform of inclusion. If you look at the actual substance of what they want on issue after issue, it's a very inclusive platform. But I think it reads to a large number of Americans as an elitist, inaccessible party. Now, you can argue that that's ginned up, that's manufactured, but just as an empirical fact, a self-styled inclusive movement reads to a lot of people as elitist. And on the flip side, a movement that is essentially a billionaire special purpose vehicle in the Republican Party has started to read to a lot of people as a working class movement. Again, you can fact check that. I can explain to you all the reasons why that's not true. It doesn't matter, right? The fact that these readings have been reversed is a moment for real reckoning. And I think Democrats have to be a working class party again, both in terms of affect, in terms of real policy vision.
Yeah.
But I also think there is a, particularly with what happened with men and white voters and now working class voters of color moving in that direction, a real question of, is this a party that when it speaks about issues sounds to people like a broad pan-American movement that strums the deepest chords of the country as opposed to catering to niche interests? And I'm not sure it's there yet, and I think it's going to take, frankly, years. This is not a this is not a 1 month autopsy.
No.
These are I'm not the sports guy at the table, but this is what is called a rebuilding year in sports,
right,
where you know you didn't win the championship this year, and you actually know you're not going to win it next year, and you actually know you're not going to win it the next year after that, and there is a certain freedom in the runway that gives you to say we have to actually reimagine a movement from scratch in many ways.
Sometimes people have to see it. I think there were a lot of warnings. I don't think Democrats were completely, not there. They were trying to warn about the contrast. And I think for a lot of people, it's very hard to comprehend.
Yeah.
And they will have to see it to believe it. I want to take a look at New York Times columnist Frank Bruni, who has a new piece entitled Democrats, Let's Get Real, about why Harris lost, and then go to Caddy. He writes in part this: Americans, at least the ones whose minds weren't firmly made up, would surely abandon Trump now. There was a limit to the cruelness and craziness they'd abide. That judgment, of course, was terribly wrong. And I want to name and dwell on a few of the reasons for its wrongness, because they're stubborn, misapprehensions, enduring blind spots. They're costing Democrats, no, they're costing America dearly. For starters, many voters don't know about or didn't really pay attention to all of Trump's florid ugliness in the final hours. Many voters aren't plugged in like that. Politics, even presidential campaigns, aren't in the center of their vision, but in its periphery, and irregularly at that. Those of us who get hourly updates, have nightly freakouts, and can hold forth on Trump and the shark, Trump, and Hannibal Lecter, and Trump and windmills aren't normal. But we are arrogant. We assume our experience is everyone's and our knowledge ambient. No, people are busy. People are distracted. People are cynical. They tune out much, if not most, of this political drama because they regard it indeed as theater, as performance, whether it's Trump's conniptions or Harris's kumbaya. So what then forms their impressions and drives their decisions? They're responding in significant measure to the state of the world around them, whether it's to their liking and whom they hold responsible for it. That was Harris's affliction, the price of food, the elusiveness of home ownership, and the fact that she'd been the #2 figure in the administration in charge of the country for the past 4 years. The obvious, boring nature of the diagnosis didn't make it any less fatal. Another blind spot, the belief that seemingly key moments matter more than ongoing conditions. Sure, Democrats had an expertly choreographed convention. Yes, Harris had a great debate, no doubt. Trump had a miserable one. And then came his Madison Square Garden debacle. But while treating each of those news stories as potential turning points spiced the narrative, it smudged the big picture, which is about satisfaction with and confidence in the country's direction. Survey after survey showed that Americans were deeply fearful and intensely pessimistic. Not even the most star-studded rally could change that. Not even an endorsement by Taylor Swift could make it go away. Katy, I think that was searingly correct in many ways. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think Frank Bruni is onto something. There was something Kellyanne Conway said back in 2016, which is that voters make a difference between what offends them and what affects them. And many of them may have been offended by Trump's comments. Many of us were offended, but it wasn't what affected them. What affected them was the fact that rents have gone up 30% since COVID, beef is up 45%, milk is up 25%, particularly the rents, because many of us own our homes and we don't feel the shock, the inflation wealth gap that produces. I think the other good piece that's really worth Democrats reading, and it's not to let the party off the hook, it has to go through this post-mortem process and it has to have a really long, hard think about the kind of leader it puts forward next time. But there's a good piece in the Financial Times today pointing out that of all the big elections that have taken place around this world this year, the 10 incumbent leaders of the major economies that voted this year, they were all thrown out of the office. And that's the first time in 120 years that happened. There's a post-COVID shock to the world, particularly on the issue of inflation, and incumbents just couldn't survive that wave. And maybe Biden should have dropped out a year earlier. Maybe